Welcome back to The Closing Table. I'm your host, Tamera. This is episode number 80, and today my special guest is going to talk about the impact the NAR changes has had on real estate right after this.
Welcome to The Closing Table with host Tamera, where we break down how to be successful in real estate and what it's really like to work in the real estate business. This is The Closing Table with Lawyer's Title.
Today, my guest, she's a returning guest, and she is one of the foremost experts in DFW real estate. Don't make that face. You are. Melissa Hailey, welcome back to my show. Thank you so much for coming back today. We've got a lot to talk about.
We do.
And we're going to try something new today. We're going to do a rapid fire session of questions. But first, let me properly introduce you. Melissa Hailey is the broker owner of North Texas Top Team Realty. She is also on the Truck Broker Lawyer Committee, broker for Bronze Star Property Management, CEO and premier instructor for Agent Advantage Coaching and Training. And she is a certified coach for Workman Success Systems. So if you don't know Melissa Hailey, you should know Melissa Hailey. We are blessed to have her be also a partner of ours for all of our CE classes. So I'm sure that a lot of the listening audience that are clients of mine or partners of Lawyer's Title has heard your name before. And of course, a lot of the real estate industry in DFW knows who you are.
They may or may not have taken a class with me already once.
May or may not, yeah. Well, I think we've had like 7 contracts classes in the at least it feels like.
Yeah, lots of it.
Lots of it. And so we're not going to do that today. We're not talking about forms, okay?
Okay.
We're going to talk about the implications, the practicality of the NAR changes. There's so much misinformation out there. There's so much misinformation.
Yeah.
Every single one of my questions today came from either a Facebook real estate group of consistent questions that I see answered either correctly or incorrectly. Well, both on the same question.
Right.
And then also, I pulled some of this from Inman as well, because I feel like, they've got kind of a pulse nationally on what people are confused about or, what the issues are within real estate. So today we're going to dispel misinformation resulting from the NAR settlement changes, but specifically as it applies in Texas.
Absolutely.
Let's be very clear about that.
Yeah, I'm not an expert.
We don't know about California.
Yeah.
We don't know what they're doing. So anyway, okay. So let's start with rapid fire questions. So basically these are questions I'm going to ask. It's a yes or no answer, and then we'll circle back and do a little bit further explanation if necessary. Okay, you ready?
Sounds good. I'm ready.
Okay. First question. Can a seller offer compensation to the buyer's agent?
Yes.
Can a buyer see a house without representation?
Yes.
Can a buyer's agent show a home without a signed buyer's rep?
No.
Can a listing agent show a house to a buyer without a buyer's agent or a signed agreement with the buyer?
Yeah.
Can a buyer come to an open house without a signed buyer's rep or a buyer's agent?
Yes.
Is a listing agent required to ask the buyer's agent showing their listing if they have a signed buyer's rep before showing the property?
No.
That's an interesting one.
That is an interesting one.
I'm seeing a lot about that question right now. Okay, so that's rapid fire.
All right.
Round 1 is over.
All right. So now we're going to dive into each one.
Sure.
Okay.
As much as we need to. And let's try to keep the answers short because, again, I want to cut these up and really get these out there for everyone. So
sure.
Expanded explanation. Number 1, can a seller offer compensation to the buyer's agent?
Sure. The answer is yes, because a buyer agent can be paid one of 3 ways. Number 1, they can be paid directly by the buyer. Number 2, they can be paid directly by the seller. And number 3, they can be paid by broker-to-broker compensation sharing, which we've been doing for hundreds of years, it feels like, forever.
Okay. Question number 2. Can a buyer see a house without representation?
Yes. So a buyer can contact a listing agent, and the listing agent can open the house, right? The key is that a real estate agent inside of a property in the state of Texas must represent somebody. Either they represent the seller or they represent the buyer. So if I represent the seller, I can show you the house. You don't have to have an agent.
Question number 3. Can a buyer's agent show a home without a signed buyer's rep?
No. Now, let me clarify. Buyer's agent, not a realtor, the answer is different. If you are a real estate agent who has a real estate license, but you are not a realtor, you don't have to follow any of the NAR rules.
Okay.
But if you're a buyer's agent who is a realtor, then yes, you must have a signed agreement. And in Texas, you have to represent one side or the other. So you either have to represent the seller or the buyer. If you don't represent the seller, you must represent the buyer.
Question number 4. Can a listing agent show a house to a buyer without a buyer's agent or a signed agreement with the buyer?
Listing agent can, because again, they represent the seller, right? So they can show the house to any prospective buyer, represented or not. They can open up the front door because again, they're in the house representing the seller.
Question number 5. Can a buyer come to an open house without a signed buyer's rep or a buyer's agent?
Yes, because again, assuming that the person hosting the open house is either the listing agent or an agent at that brokerage, right? Because the agreement between the seller is the seller to the broker. So any agent at that brokerage can host that open house and they represent the seller. If that's true, any person can come into the house because the agent inside already knows who they represent, which is the seller.
Question number 6. Is a listing agent required to ask the buyer's agent showing their listing if they have a signed buyer's rep before showing the property?
All right. So the answer is no, because we are not required to do that. As a matter of fact, the listing agent should not be requesting a copy of the buyer's rep agreement from the other agent. Like that shouldn't be happening. However, the seller might say, and it's different, right? If your seller gives you directions and says, I only want my house shown to people who have a realtor representing them, the seller can make that determination. And as long as it's in writing, the listing agent can abide by that. And they can say, hey, I need to know, do you represent that buyer when they make an appointment? And they can confirm, yes, I represent them, or no, I don't, but not asking them to see any required documents outside of that. You just have to take the other agent's word. Do they represent them or not?
Okay, so I want to deep dive into number 6 a little bit more, okay? Because I am seeing a lot of confusion on social media right now about this question. Is a listing agent required to ask the buyer's agent showing their listing if they have a signed buyer's rep before showing the property? Dive into that a little bit more and also tell us where the fiduciary responsibility is, right? And why.
And that's a huge part of it, right? Okay, so here's the thing. When you are an agent for your broker, you are doing things on behalf of your broker. So your broker has an agreement. It's a private, confidential agreement between your broker and their client, seller or buyer. It doesn't matter. That's a private, confidential agreement, which may or may not be a form that came from the state. It may be a form that your broker had written by an attorney, right? But it's private. And our responsibility as a fiduciary to our consumer is we have the duty of confidentiality. We are not supposed to be sending our buyer rep agreement to the listing agent, nor is the listing agent supposed to be sending their listing agreement to the buyer agent. Those are confidential. We have this fiduciary duty.
Well, point of clarification, what I'm seeing on social media is the listing agent is just asking if the buyer's agent has a signed buyer's rep agreement. I'm not seeing, I could be wrong, I'm not seeing conversation about asking for proof. I'm just saying that I'm seeing listing agents saying that they want to know if the buyer's rep has been executed.
Do you have one? Sure. If an agent asks, I think it's totally fine to say yes or no, right? I mean, answer the question and answer honestly, but I think that the agent who's asking the question needs to understand that they're going to have to take that agent at their word. So if I'm a listing agent and I said, Tamera, I see you want to show my house at 123 Main Street. Do you have a buyer rep agreement? And you say yes, I'm going to be like, great, happy to have you. I'm not going to say, great, send me a copy of your representation agreement, right? I'm not going to dive that one step deeper.
No, and I think what I'm seeing listing agents say is that they won't allow the buyer agent to show the house without a signed agreement. But it's what I'm hearing you say is that isn't necessary.
Well,
am I incorrect in what I'm?
Yeah. So I was at the Texas Realtors Conference earlier this week, and the attorney for Texas Realtors spoke on this exact thing. And he was like, look, if they want to do what they shouldn't be, because they shouldn't be doing it, right? They should have a buyer rep agreement. But he's like, you can't be worried about the other guy. Keep your eyes on your own paper. You have a listing agreement. You worry about you. You've got one and you've asked. And if they said yes and they confirmed that, just trust that they did. And if they didn't get one and they lie to you, whatever. let them show the house, because as a listing agent, my job is to help the most number of people get inside that house so that they can get that sucker sold, right? That's my job. Why would I try to stop that part of the transaction by deciding whether or not I wanted to tattletale on somebody who's not doing something right? I'm not their broker. I'm not in charge of them. Their broker needs to handle the fact that if they're not doing their paperwork right. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, but to clarify, you're saying it's kind of, is it muddy about this question? Like, is the listing agent responsible to ask if, no,
not at all.
Okay.
No,
so it's not their responsibility to ask.
No,
if
their
there's a buyer rep.
responsibility is to sell the house.
That's right.
That's their job. Their job is to get the house sold. And if that means somebody needs to come in the house with another agent, then they need to let that agent show that house so that they can get an offer.
Okay.
Right. So
not the listing agent's concern whether or not a buyer rep has been signed.
Yeah. You know that phrase about not my circus, not my monkey?
Yeah. Well,
that should be it, right?
You need to worry as the listing agent. Your obligation is to get the listing agreement signed, right? And be authorized to sell the house and get the home sold, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, I want to back up on question number 5. Can a buyer come to an open house without a signed buyer's rep or buyer's agent? Now, you said something on the open house side, right?
Yeah.
Pertaining to agents showing or holding an open house within the same brokerage, but we've historically had agents doing open houses from different brokerages than the brokerage that holds the listing.
Right. That's become quite a problem. All right. Because here's the thing. You have to represent somebody when you're inside that house, right? Like that's the key. So if you are not somebody affiliated with the listing broker, then when you walk in that door to host that open house, you don't represent the seller. If that's a true statement, you have 2 choices. Number 1 is you can ask to become a sub-agent of the listing broker. Now, there's a whole process that goes along with that.
I can only imagine.
And I haven't seen it done because there's a lot of brokers that don't want to offer a random agent to be one of their sub-agents. There's some responsibility to that broker.
And let's be clear, the broker is the one that holds the listing.
Right. 100%.
It's the broker's listing.
Not the agent.
Not the agent.
Correct. Okay. So can I be a sub-agent? Yes. As long as my broker knows and the listing broker knows and everybody agrees that I'm allowed to be a sub-agent and host this house open. Okay, great. Now I represent the seller as a sub-agent. I need to know who I represent. However, if that's not an option because the brokers don't want to agree on sub-agency, which is possible, the buyer's agent or the, I guess, non-listing agent can't just be in there not representing anybody. So what they could do is they could become a buyer's agent by sitting in this open house. Here's how that works, though. You can't let them in unless you have a written agreement to represent them.
Oh, goodness.
So
there we go.
Can you imagine? I'm at this open house and you walk up and you're a consumer and you're like, ding dong, I'd like to come in. And I'm like, hi, do you have a realtor? And they say no. And I go, great, sign this piece of paper before you can come in. But here's where it even gets worse. What if I say, hi, welcome to the open house. Do you have a realtor? And you say yes. Okay, now I'm in a real problem because I can't ask you to sign a representation agreement if I know you already have one, because that's like I think the legal term is tortious interference. I'm not an attorney, but I don't want to get in trouble for asking a buyer who already has signed a rep agreement with somebody else to sign another rep agreement. That's a terrible idea. So if you can't get that sub-agency agreement, you really probably shouldn't be hosting an open house for that other broker. I mean, right now, that's where it sits.
I mean, I don't know that this has been a high point of conversation, or at least I haven't seen a lot of it. And I think it needs to be, because that is one way historically that a lot of agents have picked up potential buyer clients, right? So what we're saying,
their business on the geographic area they want to serve.
Yeah.
Right? Because if I work at a brokerage and maybe I only have 4 agents in my office, I'm a small brokerage.
Right.
First of all, I probably don't have enough listings to support all of the open houses that might need to happen, right?
Right.
But even if I'm at a large brokerage and we have hundreds and hundreds of agents and hundreds of listings, what if I live in the northern sector of the county, but most of the agents are in the southern sector of the county?
Right.
Most of our listings are down there, but I want to build my business closer to home. Now, I can host open houses way down south, or I can figure something else out for up north because there's no listings up there, right? So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what broker you work for, small or large. If an agent is trying to build their business through hosting open houses and build their geographic competency and build their geographic farm, they're going to have a way to have access to those if open houses is one of those ways they plan to move forward.
It's really interesting, this segment of the conversation, because it really will affect. I mean, it kind of taps into a lot of the noise. Also, some of the other noise that I've been seeing on social media about will buyers agents lessen or go away, right?
Yeah.
And if we reduce their opportunity to gain new clients, I mean, what are the chances a broker's going to agree to a sub-agency, especially like a Compass or a Keller Williams or an Abbey or Coldwell Banker?
There's so much that goes into that, right? Because it is, does your E&O allow it? Like, that's a whole thing. Because what if your errors and omissions insurance says you can't do sub-agency? We're not going to cover those people. But the other thing is how much due diligence are you going to do on those people that want to be a sub-agent? What if I wanted to host your house open, it was your listing and you're the broker, and I have 32 disciplinary actions against me? Like, you're not going to want me as your sub-agent because I'm probably going to get in trouble a 33rd time.
Yeah.
And guess who gets in trouble with me? The broker.
Yeah.
Even if I'm a sub-agent. So I'll tell you again real quick what the attorney said, because, again, this kind of came up at the Texas Realtors Conference, and the attorney was funny about the way he answered it. He just said, you know what? Here's what I'm going to say. You got to know who you represent when you're in that house.
That's so interesting.
And then he just did like a mic drop.
Yeah.
Because that's the key. When you walk in that door, who do you represent?
Wow. Okay. I'm going to have to stew on this one for a minute.
Okay. I'm good with that.
I just think that there's, like I said, I mean, part of what we're doing here today is trying to dispel a lot of the misinformation, right? And so that question is an interesting one because, like I said, I don't think it's been brought up a whole lot, or at least I haven't seen it being brought up a whole lot on some of these real estate Facebook pages where I'm seeing all of this misinformation.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to be another issue to address once
it
agents
starts
figure,
clicking.
yeah.
And I'll tell you, I see it all the time, but I see it in my independent broker network stuff on social media.
Sure.
Like, the brokers are talking about it, but the agents haven't. It hadn't trickled all the way down yet.
It's super interesting. Okay. So some of the other things that I have been looking at. Okay. I don't want to dive into this too deeply because I just don't think it's necessary. And I have some other questions I really want to get to. But what's the difference between the one-page buyer rep agreement and the full buyer rep agreement?
Sure. Besides the fact that one is one page,
That's
one
correct.
is 5 pages.
That's correct. That's correct.
Right. Okay. So we're talking about the TXR forms. So
Correct.
First of all, there's no requirement that you use the TXR forms. So some brokers have gone to the extent to create their own representation agreements. So what I want to say before we go a whole lot farther about forms is, if you're an agent and you're listening to this, the first thing you need to do is you need to talk to your broker, and you need to make sure that you're clear on what forms you're allowed to use, what forms your broker is directing you to use, because they may say we use the TXR ones, or they may say, nope, we're using our own. And even if they say you can use the TXR forms, they may say we only use this one and not that one.
That's right. There's a lot of the brokers, or I'm hearing that brokers are not allowing for the one page.
Right. So, like, the big caveat to this whole conversation is talk to your broker. Matter of fact, talk to your broker. So important.
Yeah.
Talk to your broker, because everybody's different.
And a lot of the answers to questions that are happening right now, on the issues that are happening right now, are broker questions. I mean, questions that only your broker should answer.
Right.
We're getting questions about how are we going to handle this? How are we going to handle, and our response is
talk to your broker.
Talk to your broker. Well, I mean, I haven't hung out with you at all. So
the theme of today's podcast is talk to your broker. I love that.
What if the broker doesn't know? Right. Yeah. And so there's a lot of that happening right now, but anyway, not the focus. Okay.
All right. So let me go back to your question.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between the 1 page and 5 page or full buyer rep agreement, I think is the way you mentioned it. So in the longer form, there is more specifics about whose duties to do what are, and remedies when things don't go well. On the 1 page form, just by the sheer number of the fact that you have less You have less space on
less
paper.
real estate on the paper.
Right,
Yeah.
less space on the paper. Everything is condensed. You're missing some indemnification clauses that would be really good protections for you. And as a matter of fact, if you fill out the one-page TXR buyer representation agreement, and you check the box that says limited service, showing service only, if you check that, you'll notice that you don't use any of the further paragraphs in the contract. They do not pertain. And the very next paragraph is the one that gives the buyer a responsibility to the agent. So if you use that for just showings only, you as the agent have responsibilities and the buyer has none in a reciprocal agreement with you. They have no responsibility to you in any way, shape, or form.
So what I want to ask you is, I understand in the one-page agreement, there is a space where an agent can charge a fee to show the house one time.
Sure.
So do you want to talk to me about how that works?
All right. So first, it's not just the agent, right? Like the agents don't get to pick. Brokers are the ones that get to set the fees. As a matter of fact, this is also super important that you didn't ask about, but I think we need to clarify, because it does have a place on the TXR form that says, I will only show you houses and I will charge you this amount of money for this service, because you're going to get the service today. I'm going to show the houses, so you need to pay for the service today. So on the form, it says this fee or fees or whatever is payable at the time we sign this document. So two things are important. Number one, agents don't get to pick the amount of money goes in that blank. The brokers do. And number two, agents don't get to put that money in their pocket.
What?
Money is the broker's money. And then the broker will have some kind of split with their agent, like they do on every other type of income that comes into the brokerage that you make because you provided a service, right? So TREC doesn't have a whole lot of regulation on fees, but what they do regulate is that money goes to the broker, not the agent.
Okay. That's really interesting, because I don't know that I've heard anybody talk about the fact that it's the broker's money, not
100%. TREC has a rule that says all the money is the broker's money, because the broker is the one that has the agreement with the consumer.
That's right. I didn't tell you what I was hearing on social media was good.
Yeah, I feel you. I'm trying to stay off of it right now.
This made me think of another question. Okay, so a lot of what I'm seeing on social media is that buyers agents are having trouble getting the buyer to sign the agreement. Like, what is the conversation that needs to be had to help them get over this hump?
Okay.
Do you have any advice?
I do, because here's the thing. Here's like the number one thing is stop making it about you. It's realtors. It's not about you. It is about your consumer, right? So when I teach and train agents, I always start with number one, the IABS form, because the IABS form is required by the Real Estate Commission, and it tells the buyer that they have choices, right? And so if we go over the IABS form and we explain the choices that they have and what our minimum duties required by law are, because they're right there on the IABS form, then when we switch over to the buyer representation agreement, we're like, this is why it's important for you, buyer. If we will
you should couple those.
Yes, first of all, those two forms need to go together. And second of all, it needs to be about the buyer, right? Why is it important for you to have choices, buyer? Why is it important for you to sign this document? Because it explains clearly in writing what my job is and what your job is. And you need to know what I'm doing for you and what I'm not doing for you. Right? Because it needs to be others focused. It can't just be, I need you to sign this because I'm not going to get paid. Blah! It's not about you, real estate agent. It's about the consumer. How can I twist the conversation? How can my script be, Tamera, here are all of your choices. And I know what you really want is help buying your house. And here's how I can help you. And in order to do that, here's this piece of paper. If it's all about you, you're going to want to sign it because buyers want us to help them.
Right. They're coming to you for a reason. Yeah.
Right. They want to hire us to help them.
Right.
They just don't understand the process. And I think for a long time we did a crummy job of explaining what that is. And people talk about, you need to know your value proposition. Well, yeah, you got to have a value proposition. But the first value is, I'm going to help you walk through this whole transaction. I'm going to help you. That's what they want. They want you to help them. So just make them understand this is how I help you.
Okay. I have another question that's not on my script.
Okay. Ask away.
I'm sorry. We're going to go longer than what I originally planned. I'm sorry. There's so much to unpack here.
Okay.
Okay. So buyer signs a buyer rep with agent A.
Sure.
This is not a new problem. Okay. So I'm going to ask you anyway. I mean, we experienced this a lot during COVID when it was super maniac and buyers were just trying to get into houses. Okay. So buyer signs buyer rep with agent number one, comes across buyer agent number two. Buyer agent number two asks buyer, do you have an agreement with another agent?
Sure.
Buyer says no.
Right. Buyers are liars.
Buyers are liars.
Probably maybe shouldn't have said that on the podcast.
That's what
but we do talk about that quite a bit, actually.
I'm dead. Okay. So I'm still trying to get past buyers are liars. Okay. Excuse me. Let me compose myself again. We are going to have some outtakes at some point. Okay. So, and we had this problem a lot, right? Okay. So procuring cause, this is where procuring cause.
Yeah, procuring cause. Yeah.
Okay. So, and I saw this scenario on one of the Facebook pages. I mean, it's just I'm curious all the time. I'm like inundated with this stuff. Anyway, so buyer finds house with buyer agent number two.
Right.
Okay. Buyer signs contract with buyer agent number two.
Sure.
Buyer agent number one is like, wait a minute. I had an agreement. Aren't I owed commission from this? What's the answer?
I don't think any of that technically changed, except for the fact that we have other options, right? Like that buyer might have a rep agreement with agent number one that is for showing services only for these 3 houses. Well, okay, great. What if they don't buy one of those houses? Or heck, for that matter, what if they do buy one of those houses? That agent did a short form for showing services only. They were paid to show the house. They provided the service they said they were going to provide, which was to open the door. They were paid in order to do that, so they've already been paid. They have no rights to anything. So agent number two comes along with a full 5-page long buyer representation agreement that says, I'm going to help you in the geographic area that includes, maybe it's an entire city this time. That same house is on there, and they're now representing them fully all the way with full service all the way through. Does that make sense?
It does.
So there's a lot to what was the first agreement. But if both agents had just a regular
full page,
full old school buyer representation agreement, and the first one says, well, I showed them the house, so here's how procuring cause works. You have to be the reason from start to finish without a break in continuity that they made it from here to here.
Repeat that again.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure somewhere in some class that I teach, it talks about Black's Law's definition is start to finish without a break in continuity. So if I showed you the house and then I don't call you back, and then I don't help you write the offer, and then I don't help you with inspections, and I don't recommend a lender, you got a break in continuity.
Okay.
Agent number two probably still is going to show him the house a second time, or is at least going to come back at some other point and is going to take the rest of the steps from point A to point B to get them to closing, hopefully without a break in continuity, right? So the second agent who has a buyer rep agreement is going to write the offer and run the comps and recommend home inspectors and do all of the things and get them all the way to the finish line. So who really earned the money?
Buyer agent number two.
Right.
Will there be changes to contracts to the truck 104? I'm switching gears.
That is like a trick question. Yes, there is.
When do we predict to see the new contract? Do we have an idea?
If all of the stars align, January.
Okay.
Yeah, January 2025 would be a good timeline. Can I just throw out a plug real quick?
Yep.
If you're listening to this podcast and it is still in 2024, actually, if it is between now and October,
and today is August 28th.
Yep, you have until October the 6th. Please, please, please go to Trek's website. On the homepage, it says, see the new proposed form changes and comment. They are out right now for comment, for public comment. You can be an agent or you can be just a Joe Schmo home buyer or seller, a member of the public. We want the comments because at the broker lawyer meeting on October the 11th, we're going to go over all of the comments and decide, are the forms good the way we've submitted them or do they need another change?
Okay.
If they don't need another change, likely you'll get approval.
This is your opportunity to have your voice heard.
Yeah, this is when you can have your voice heard. You need to participate in the process, for sure.
As we move into a new reality, buyer and listing agents are looking for ways to streamline processes and communicate effectively with their clients. What suggestions do you have? And by the way, I know realtors' phones are blowing up right now.
So a couple of things that I would say. Communication, number one, needs to be on point. They need to have their communication skills down. And we kind of suck at it as a people group. So we need to get better at communicating. I don't care if you want to text them, call them, email them, all of the above. I think that you need to respond, and you need to respond as quick as possible with the information, because you have a duty to your consumer, right? If your buyer says, I want to know if this house is offering compensation of some sort, that buyer's agent has a duty to find that out. And that listing agent's job is to help sell that house. And so they have a duty to respond and help facilitate that sale with as many buyer agents as necessary. Can it be just email, text, and phone? Sure. Can it also be, I've posted some information on my website? Yes. Where it can't be is in the MLS, right? That's the rule. It can't be compensation information in the MLS. But yeah, agents need to talk to each other. Just generally speaking, they need to communicate. And I'm also going to just say give each other some grace. Right?
I mean, I've got realtors that are telling me, they're getting 300 texts in a day. That's not manageable, Melissa.
I know.
So do you see any, okay, let me ask you this. Do you see any top ways people are streamlining right now? Like, what's coming out of this,
Sure.
What's the most popular, or what do you predict is the most popular way?
Well, I think in what's not only popular but safe is I've seen quite a few people have put their listings on their website with compensation details. Whether it is broker to broker is offering, seller is offering, seller's not offering, there's no money to be had. Put it out there and put it on your website. And then if somebody sends you a text and says, is there compensation on 123 Main Street, and just auto response, click here.
Yeah.
Click here, or send them a QR code.
Yeah.
I know some people have put sign writers on top of their signs in the front yard.
Yep.
Compensation details here with a QR code.
Yep.
Awesome. Again, it can be on the website. This house has no compensation offered.
It doesn't have to be.
It just can't be tied to your IDX feed. It can't come over directly from your MLS and an IDX feed. So NAR made I don't know if I want to call it an FAQ, a best practice, a two-click best practice.
2-click.
Because some people are actually putting like a link to their website in the MLS. That is allowed to put the link to your website in the MLS as long as it doesn't take you directly to the page about compensation. So if you have a homepage that says, welcome to my broker information or my real estate information page, here's all the things. By the way, if you want to know more about compensation, click here. You could put a link in the MLS that takes them to that homepage, and that homepage says, here's all the things, and by the way, click here. When they click the second time, it takes them to the compensation page.
Okay,
that's allowed.
Yep, that is allowed.
NAR gave that 2-click best practice.
Let me see. I want to see if there's anything. I feel like we've covered it. I think the last question I'm going to ask before we wrap up is, there's been a concern that buyers agents might not be willing to show homes where sellers have stated they're providing little or no compensation.
Mm-hmm.
And we do have an issue with steering, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
don't do it.
Don't do it.
Don't steer. Yeah.
But I think what I'm seeing buyers agents say, at least on social media, is I'm presenting the options to my buyer that include not only the house, but whatever type of compensation is being offered. And then the buyer is choosing not to see the house that has little or no compensation offered by the seller, because then they know they're going to be responsible to pay my compensation out of their own pocket.
Sure. All right. So kind of back to where we started, right? Is that the buyer has some duties required that they have to look out for the best interest of their buyer above them and their own, right? Best interest, right? That's part of their fiduciary responsibility. So if the buyer says, I'm looking for this many bedrooms, this many bathrooms in this city for this price, the agent needs to send all of them regardless of what the compensation is. And then the buyer can decide which ones they want to see.
With or without the compensation included?
With
Doesn't
or
matter?
without, it doesn't matter. Send all of the houses, right? That's like that's the first step. Send all of them. The buyer can say, oh, now that I've seen the whole list, I don't want to see these houses because they don't have a pool or they do have a pool, right? I don't want to see these because they don't have an HOA or they do have an HOA. Or I don't want to see these because they do or do not plan to offer compensation and I really need that. The buyer can make that choice, but you better get it in writing that your buyer made the choice and it wasn't you, real estate professional, because you'll find yourself in trouble. So that's thing number one.
Okay, wait a minute. That's important.
Mm-hmm.
That's important. So how would they get that in right? You're talking just an email or a text and just say, the buyer, buyer, I need you to send me a response that says you are unwilling to see these houses because there's no seller compensation offered.
Sure. You could absolutely, but you definitely need something in writing. There's no form. There's no specific format. But so I was talking to a different real estate attorney who said, just be like an attorney. We get on the phone and we talk to you about stuff. And then when we follow up, we send you an email and we say, per our conversation, I just wanted to recap and just put it out there and say, please confirm that this is what you want me to do and get them to respond in the affirmative.
Got it.
So somehow cover your butt, right? Because it can't be that the agent is dictating what you can and can't see because we're back to steering.
Okay.
No, but here's the other thing, and I think this is important. I think if I'm a home buyer, I'm probably not going to say, hey, Tamera, thanks for sending me 42 listings that meet my criteria. I need you to call all 42 sellers and find out if they're offering or not, right? That's a lot, and that's arduous. I would probably be like, okay, Tamera, I like all of these. These look good. Let's go see all of the houses I like. And then when I pick the one that I want, let's figure out if they're offering anything. And if they're not, I'm going to just write it into my offer because I don't have any extra cash. So if they can't make it work, then that's not the house for me. Because that's not any different than it was 6 months ago or 6 years ago, where somebody might have a house listed for $500,000 and I might really only feel comfortable spending $475,000, but I'm going to go look at that house and then I'm going to maybe make them a lowball offer. And if they don't go with it, they don't go with it and I move on. That's still between buyer and seller.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, buyer's already fallen in love with the house.
But if the buyer falls in love with the house, then the buyer's got to figure out a way to either make it work or they're just going to be disappointed when they can't get it because I might have wanted that house really bad for $475,000 and the seller wouldn't come down on the price and be like, I really want that house. I either have to come up with the extra money or I have to just move on. It's the same concept.
Okay.
It's the same concept. So it needs to be in the buyer's hands. 1,000% it needs to be in the buyer's hands, not the agent dictating what property they can see.
I think we have done an excellent job handling all of the crazy things I'm seeing.
There's so many more
There's
for
so
another
many
day.
more for another- Well, I always reserve the right to have you back on the podcast as I need to because, I mean, it was just like out of control. All
It
of
is
the
out of
confusion
control right now.
is a lot,
Can I just also say one other thing? It's probably going to be out of control until mid next year.
Okay.
Right? Because some people have one concept of what the forms are. Other people are like, there's new forms, right? And so it's all over the place.
Yeah.
But on top of that, Texas Realtors gave us forms to start using June 24th. We used them for a month and a half. And then in August 15th, they said, hey, we have new forms that actually became effective last Friday. So there was already a change there. We know that TREC is gearing up for making changes. When that happens, TXR is going to have to make some more changes to their forms. And so I think we just have to be like a home buyer who's buying a house. We have the information that we have right now. And once we get the home inspection, we might change our mind and want to do something different. And I think as real estate agents and brokers, like the agent and the broker, right now, we're going to make some plans with what the information is we have today. And when new information becomes available, we might be like, I need to make a shift. And that's probably going to keep happening until mid next year when people are finally kind of starting to settle into where no more changes on the contracts. I kind of got my policies figured out. I've sold a house or two under the new rules.
Yeah.
I think it'll all start to settle down, but man, it's a good 6 or 9 months away.
Well, and to kind of rumors I'd like to dispel on the title side that I'm hearing.
Okay.
Is, first of all, we would really like y'all to use Form 2406.
Right. Title needs to know. Well,
we would really, really like it if you would use Form 2406. Until the Trek contract, I would assume that the 1 to 4 is going to encompass some, if not all, of what 2406 addresses right now.
Some, but not all.
Understood.
Yep.
And then also, we don't have a responsibility to check and make sure that you're using the latest version of the contract. So that is something that, we don't really care which version you use,
well,
as long as it's executed in good order, right?
The title company's not supposed to be the real estate agent expert.
Yeah.
You're not the broker.
Well, and we work with wholesaler and investors. You should see some of the contracts we get from them. So,
sure.
That's a responsibility of the realtor and the broker.
Yeah.
To make sure.
Or in that case, the
using
consumer that thinks they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Sure.
And we love all of our realtor partners. So please help us help you.
Yes. Yeah. I know we're wrapping it up, but
Yes.
can I just say one other thing that I think is important on that communication piece that we mentioned? As an agent, you better be communicating with the lender and the title company way early in the process.
Yes. You could blow up a deal if the buyer is responsible for compensation and the lender doesn't know about it. And it's part,
you don't find out until the CPA and neither does the lender.
Yeah.
And it could 100% blow up a deal.
Yeah. And we need to know what the agreement is between all of the parties as well.
Right.
Yes. No, very important. Thank you for that also.
Talk to your title company, communicate with your title company. That's part of my communication for realtors. Like in that whole communicate with each other, they got to communicate with lenders and title early in the process. Super important.
So we are going to make it a priority to get this out as quickly as possible because I think this is an incredibly important podcast. Probably the most, no offense to my other guests, but probably the most important podcast I've done in a very long time. So thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for being a valued partner of Lawyers Title. Thank you for being my friend.
Oh.
Yeah. And again, I reserve the right to have you back anytime. That's a wrap on episode number 80. Again, I'm your host, Tamera Gady. If you like my content, you're really going to love my escrow team. Let's get a conversation going about your title needs and make it a great day.